So I think we're going to see real transformation of Christianity, but it's only going to happen if we move to different paradigm frameworks of understanding the world, which have been labeled New Age, but they're not New Age. They're ancient. We just suppress them. We suppress them with institutional religion.
Welcome to another episode of Holy Heretics, Losing Religion and Finding Jesus from the Sophia Society. We are your hosts, Melanie
and Gary Allen.
And today we are excited to introduce you to Travis Wade Zinn, whose faith journey starts out very much like many of ours, but then diverges quite drastically. But we'll get more into that in a second. He holds an honors degree in religion and specializes in Christian mysticism. He has studied at several Zen monasteries throughout the world, and he is the author of a book called Path of Trinity, Journey into Christian Mysticism. So welcome, Travis. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey, Travis, I realize you're from East Tennessee, and I lived there for about 10 years, so who knows? We might be related. It's a small world over there, right?
It absolutely is.
Melanie has told me a little bit about your faith journey, and she even referenced how it started out, maybe a lot like ours from an evangelical perspective. Can you just tell us about that journey? Tell us about your background and where it's led you.
All right, I grew up in the Ozarks of southern Missouri in a conservative Christian holiness family. This is an offshoot of Methodism, and during this time, we were homeschooled in the Bill Gothard ministry, so Advanced Training Institute. People probably heard of the Duggars and the Quiverful movement, 19 and Counting series. So we were involved in this, and I went over to Russia to teach as part of this ministry. I had started my theology degree at 17, and by 19 I was working for the Department of Education there.
Oh, wow.
And while I was in Russia, my parents had changed from the conservative holiness church they were going to and began attending an independent Baptist church nearby. And in this church, they had taken Bill Gothard's teachings to another level. The whole patriarchy issues had emerged for our family that hadn't been the case in the past, and it created major crisis and conflict. And so my father asked me to come home. And when I came home, I saw all that had happened as a result. There was, even domestic violence at the time.
So that you didn't that wasn't there before, and then as like the patriarchy was accepted, it turned into that?
Well, I think there are always these catalyst events, and obviously in the conservative holiness movement, there were structures that were patriarchal, and these cultural frameworks have existed, throughout American history, and have been in a kind of equilibrium, I would say. But as we're moving in now into the 90s, a lot of those structures had started to break down. But that wasn't so much the issue. There had always been an equilibrium in their marriage. The issue was this new pastor who was preaching this very, very aggressive approach to family dynamics. And that had caused some problems for the marriage. I think it empowered latent issues maybe that were there. But, my mother had wanted to speak in church on a topic. And, that was just, there are some churches where that becomes a problem. And so there were just different things that, created crisis.
Wow. So as a result of all of that, what happened to you and your faith when you came back to kind of intervene, and do you have siblings? If so, how did they respond to all this as well?
I wouldn't want to sort of go into much detail about my sister who did leave Christianity. And this was traumatic for her. But in my case, I was on my way to being a missionary. I had already done mission work in different countries. I was already, in my teens, had already been to college at Bible Missionary Institute. So this was my life. This was my structure of understanding myself, understanding the world. And so it was a terribly hard hit because I sat down and said, this independent Baptist pastor, he's not filtering stuff. He's, I don't know, reading about slavery law in the Old Testament and genocide, and you know, he's not using those filters that typically, if you've had theological training, you will put in place. Some of these training people have in seminaries.
Hmm.
So, you know, dogmatic patriarchy is there in the Bible. Polygamy. That's why you have it in Mormon Church, among other
Hmm.
places. So, reading the Bible at these literalist levels instead of at the symbolic level or the spiritual level uh, can train wreck. And so I dealt with it honestly. I'm like, okay, what's he saying? Well, how should I see this? And it sent me off then to get a degree in religion. Um, and It was tough. I got into a really good um, religion degree program. I was the president of the Religious Studies Association, got an honors degree, but I was struggling. I mean, I went into existential crisis. I
Mm.
studied existentialism, um, and it began a kind of implosion of my self-concept. I mean, if you look at it in Freudian terms, you have the superego, the ego, and the id. And so the ego level can, if the superego level, which was my fundamental orientation, that is to say, God, collapses for me, and if I experience a personal death of God, for me, that sucked my ego into that.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
I sort of didn't come out again anew for 20 years. But I went on to study after that to grad school in Amsterdam. I studied religious and cultural theory and was focused on pathologies of religions and cultures. So I wanted to understand how cultures and religions went bad, you know, and I worked on it. But I crashed and burned in grad school. I got involved in drugs and, all of those mental health issues that emerged from that
Mm.
existential crisis caught up with me. I ended up homeless at one point.
Hmm. Wow. I think a lot of us are there on some level when you begin to deconstruct some of the faith traditions that you have been handed. You're, as you said, you not only deconstruct God and maybe the death of a version of God, but there is
Hmm.
also a personal death that you go through, an
Hmm.
identity crisis, the things that you held so true and so dear, you realize were either false or misleading. And I've experienced that even over the last several years of what is even real, what is even true, and then are any of the things that I've believed in my past even real? And it
Mm.
does send
Hmm.
you into this existential crisis of identity.
Hmm.
So you went from a very conservative, incredibly legalistic fundamentalist background with the Gothard movement, with a
Hmm.
version of Southern Baptist, to spending,
Hmm.
it sounds like, from your book, quite a lot of time in Zen monasteries and Christian
Hmm.
mysticism. I mean, that's the other extreme. How did you go? How did you get there? That's not one right turn. That's a whole other worldview.
Well, so we're talking 20 years lapse between those two events, just to put it in context. So after crashing and burning in grad school in Amsterdam, I ended up doing professional work, and I lived in 5 different world capitals, and in countrysides. So I just completely left academia. I left religion. I remember sitting down with a Buddhist monk in England at a Tibetan monastery. I was there for a little while, and the Buddhist tradition is well, it's a long discussion there, but basically I said, I'm not even going to do Buddhism. I'm going to have a Nietzschean yes saying immersion into reality, and I've even had it with alternative forms of religion to the one I had, and I did. I mean, I was away for 20 years, and I came back. I had a drinking problem, and I was walking through Nice, France. I'd been a academic manager at a language school where I taught and did other things. But I was walking down the street and I walked past this Zendo, which is, kind of a meeting place like, martial arts heaven, but, Zendo. And they had meditation. I'm like, I should check that out. So
Mm.
I'm not quite sober. I walk in there and they're
Oh
sitting down,
gosh.
and and they're those Zen people, right? They're sitting there sitting down, and they see me walk in, and I'm just standing there, and one of the guys gets up and he hands me this Zafu. It's like the thing you sit on, and I probably smell like a brewery, but they set me down. have me sit up straight, and they walk around with these sticks, they'll whack you if you don't sit up straight. So I think I did pretty good. So, and then I started going back, and I started doing these intensive sesshin, which are Zen retreats where you meditate many hours a day, and that was in the Deshimaru tradition, which is Soto Zen, and my teacher was they're based in Nice. So that slowly was my entrance into Zen. And then I had an accident when I was in Nice and ended up handicapped. I had spent some time in a hospital, brain injury,
Hmm.
and I got pretty sick. And so I had to come back to the United States to get support and care. And I went and moved and lived on a Zen monastery in California for 5 months and got well. I got super well.
Mm,
So,
So after that, though, somehow you ended up coming back to Christianity, not the Christianity you were raised in, but a different version of it. So how did that happen?
right. So when I was on the monastery, we would meditate up to 7 hours a day, working in silence. This is a highly disciplined container. And I do think that's something to highlight. Christianity needs these containers of discipline. And when I was at university, I was on the fencing team, right? You don't get good as a fencer, by doing ballet and doing, all these other things. I mean, ballet would actually help for fencing, but, some other sport. Um, you don't get good at that unless there's a discipline and a container for spiritual progress. And I think Christianity and all these new age things and all that, that's soft religion. That's
Hmm.
I don't mean to generalize it Christianity. To give you an example, when I was on the monastery, I was having these experiences as a result of the awakening I had. And so I would have a synchronicity, precognitive dreams. I could set and count on my watch and say, okay, somebody's coming around the corner, and they'd come right around the corner. It was that level of the sort of bundled density of experience. But there was came to the monastery to spend a retreat, a Catholic superior general of the Oratorians in France. So that's a very high level. And he was just getting away from work, relax. And well, not relax. I doubt that ever happened, but to do practice. James Cunningham, and we were doing this chant at the table, and he was across from me. And there's this Zen chant: "Maybe with all beings realize the emptiness of the three wills: giver, receiver, and gift." And that has it's a very distilled theological implications. And so we started talking about theology of the gift and some other French thinkers related to gift theology and gift philosophy. And there was a spiritual resonance there. I met a superior general who's on the Zen monastery doing practice with me. And so that was the first event where I'm like, okay, you can be a Christian and also be doing dedicated serious disciplines, which those exist in the monastic traditions, of course, as well.
Hmm.
Um, and then the second experience I had is after I left the Zen monastery, I'd gone to Illinois and I was doing cement finishing. And there was this event that was happening there as I was finishing cement. There was a scenario that emerged where I had this strong feeling of judgment, like there was an injustice occurring. And when I had that feeling, I had in my head, my name is Uriel. Okay. And so I kind of tabled that because, like, I finished the cement, right? And I got back to the house and I looked up. The Uriel is an archangel, and so I went into meditation with the Bible that I had there at that house, and I was like inquiring, okay, what is the meaning of this? And I opened to this passage in the Bible and said to break the arm of the wicked. And I inquired further, and it said, "Your angel told me there's another side to me, is Oriel." I thought, well, that's kind of weird. Not weird, that wasn't my feeling, but it's surprising. And
Mhm.
so I couldn't find any answers. So I got in contact with this Kabbalist rabbi, and he said, "Oh yeah," he says, "I'll send you a graphic. That's another side of this angel. They're all multifaceted, and you're exactly right." And so he sends me this graphic of this angel and Metatron and such. And so that was the beginning of me moving back in to the orbit of Western faith. And that was followed by a number of other things. I encountered St. Pio, who had no idea who he was, in a dream where I had support. And then I had a number of encounters with him further. I got a dream where Archangel Michael came to me, and I was directed to go to Estonia, which I did. I went to Estonia. And when I was in Estonia on a train, um, I had the theology vision that was given to me that I was in my book. So
Mm.
this is the kind of progression of, meeting the superior general, randomly finishing cement with no desire or have any kind to go back to Christianity, encountering an archangel, and then that linking with the Western tradition, and St. Pio, and then so it all came together to where that was the return.
Mm.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of us grew up with a version of Christianity that was far more belief centered. That
Hmm.
we were told that Christianity is all about having the right ideas and thinking the right things about God, about Jesus, and about the Bible. And obviously,
Hmm.
beliefs are crucial and they're important, but you are tending to espouse a more um, orthopraxy version of
Hmm.
Christianity. So, whether, orthodoxy, of which we all know is sort of thinking the right things,
Right.
this version of Christianity really focuses far more on practice, on experience, and on disciplines. Can you just talk about how that has changed your spirituality, moving from orthodoxy to orthopraxy?
Absolutely. The Zen life, the Zen person life, is explicitly not non-dogmatic. It's all about deconstructing the false self, deconstructing, all of these cultural frameworks. And, what is the sound of one hand clapping? It's meant to really jam the system of these preconceived concepts we have about reality. So that was, the opening, along with meditation, into an orthopraxic uh, approach to Christianity. I mean, those Zen disciplines create, spiritual awakening experiences, and those open out onto a much more non-dogmatic, open-minded experience. That happens within frameworks, even within Zen, but they're non-dogmatic. In Zen, if you see the Buddha in the road, kill him. you know,
Mm,
the idea there is that uh, these preconceived frameworks need to be eliminated in order to get to the truth of reality. So that is an approach coming through the Zen door that allowed me to come at Christianity in a completely different way. Following on that, then having experiences that took me back, I would say explicitly back, to ancient spiritual paths that coincided and were within Christianity that we've lost. So my experience basically was of a kind of spiritual cartographer. I'm going back and finding these paths. Let's just so I'm a fencer, right? Or I was. Let's just say fencing had completely disappeared. It doesn't
mm,
mean there was never the fencing discipline, or that discipline can't produce, you know, levels of outcome within the person. It's just it's gone. And so all of those suppressed spiritual disciplines and paths that were transformative at early stages of Christianity and were overwhelmed by institutional religion, those reemerged for me through those experiences. So it's not without container. It's not without container. That's essential, both in terms of community and so on. But it is a non-dogmatic, open-minded praxis rather than orthodoxy, and then open to other faiths informing your own practice. We have to have that in our Christianity. If our Christianity doesn't become mystical and embrace the mystical truth, I don't see how it's going to survive in the 21st century.
Can
mm,
you explain what you mean by mystical?
Well, there are many mystical traditions, as you know, within the West and within the East, and then also within Christianity. Or they're less known by most evangelicals. The Orthodox tradition has a long-standing mystical faith practice. The idea of experience of theosis um, is essentially union with God in an important way. It's Christ said, "Is it not written, ye are gods?" And people will have a problem with the interpretation of that potentially, but we are children of God. We
mm,
are children of God, and that is to say, we do have within us the divine spark. We're body, soul, and spirit. So, spirit is that aspect of us that is divine. Let's be frank. The soul is that individuated, purified part of us, but until we break through in spirit, we remain basically bound and trapped. In the East, that's karma concept. In the West, it's original sin. But the point there is you have to get liberated from that, and being in the position of saying, well, I've basically signed on this document and now I'm saved and here I go on with my life and buy a new SUV. It's not going to cut it. So that's why we got to go back to the early, I would say, the Christian Hermetic tradition. Go back to the early traditions that had ascent traditions that are basically the ancient practices uh, that are what sort of New Age soft is trying to feed us. And I'm not discounting all the people who are contributing in that way. I'm just saying we have that in Christianity. We can recover it. And
Hmm.
that's the only way forward, I think.
So, what are some of these practical disciplines or habits that we have lost in the West, in particular in Christianity, if someone is really looking to um, move beyond just a belief based Christianity into a practical, um, you know, as my priest has told me, we've been given a toolbox of tools that will help us lead toward union with God, toward interior
Hmm.
transformation, but we've lost the toolbox.
Hmm.
So, what are those tools? I mean, what do you use in your spiritual practices that aid and abet a more mystical expression of Christianity?
Well, coming through the Zen door, that was deep meditation practice. I mean,
Mm,
I was getting my food on my mat and, hours of meditation, but it doesn't take that. You can have a daily meditation practice. You can have mindfulness disciplines. That is focused awareness on what you think. Your thinking has implications in the external world. And when you start with a truly mystical viewpoint, in Hermetism, that's the concept, and this is also in Christian, consciousness is the fundamental basis of reality. Well, once you acknowledge that, you realize that thoughts in the imaginal realm, that is not imagination, but in the realm that surrounds us and interpenetrates us, have implications in the real world. That's not a new age thing; that's ancient. So once we do those mindfulness practices, we become more and more aware of the implications of our thinking, become more aware of how we're interacting with others, and then the meditation supports that. So those are two key things. In our evangelical traditions of the West, we don't have a monastic tradition. We don't yet. I mean, it's being reformed by some, right? But having deep community practice, I think we have to reconsider forming communities that represent our values and then entering into deeper practice. So, but you can do that as an individual with just a basic meditation and mindfulness practice.
mm,
Hmm. I'm curious if there's anything from the fundamentalist faith you were raised in that you have kept or at least um see as good, or if you look back and you're just like it was so off base that there was nothing good coming of that, or how you view that, especially considering like all the negative manifestations that happened in your family because of that upbringing.
Okay, great question. Well, I think you can have what they would philosopher might say a secondary naivete. So you can go through a process of transformation, and that's something in esoteric Christianity that comes up. But uh, you can go through a rejection of a core beginning and return to that beginning again, a new person. So it's a kind of the
Hmm.
not the prodigal son almost, but not in some sort of literalist way, but in that you do that whole transformational journey, right? And then you come back and you see the father even differently, right? So my own experience is one that I have always been extremely honest and value truth. Well, that means that I have to not just be reactionary. I started out that way, but then I've started to study traditionalism. In the West, we don't. I mean, in America, we don't have a deep intellectual tradition of looking at that. But I lived with the Bruderhof for a while. So that's an Anabaptist community like the Mennonites. And they had very traditional, right? Gender relationships, but there was harmony within that. There are other challenges to community life, but there was harmony within that. So, probably you've heard of Rod Dreher.
Mm.
There's the idea that these cultural frameworks that we have. I mean, look, China's right now obliterating Tibetan culture.
Mm.
Well, some part of us wants to say that's not cool. That's not what you want. And postmodernism is deconstructing and obliterating all of our cultural norms. Well, that's why you have such a reaction by people. They don't have an intellectual framework to think about it, but in that vacuum comes QAnon and all this other nonsense. So they're fighting for their life, for their tradition. I totally understand that. Even that experience growing up where there was this patriarchal reaction. Well, that's because there was this emerging um, new framework, even within that, where a woman has a voice, right? And that's great. But there must be a way to, I think communitarianism is one of the solutions, both for our traditional communities and for alternative communities, because it allows them, and also for deep spiritual practice on top of that, I would say, it allows people to retain their identity. Not everybody's moving ahead at the same speed, you know, and that
Mm.
creates all kinds of cultural chaos. And to the other side of that, there needs to be gender balance. We don't want to like deny men to be men. So it's something right now in our culture that's challenging. So when I look at what's happening in you know uh, deep American evangelical heartland, I'm sad for that, right? And I have a very nostalgic and kind feeling towards certainly the conservative holiness movement. This is very heart based faith. So I think, can we renew those in ways that can sustain those traditions? I don't know. They're going to have to go deep. They'll have to have an inner life that's been lost, especially in this age.
I love the call to community in the sense
Hmm.
that, we can't do this alone. I don't think we've ever been asked to do it alone. And I think
Hmm.
we need others to, model what it does truly look like to follow
Hmm.
Christ in a consumer society and
Hmm.
to model that whole archetypal journey of death and resurrection and dying to self and self
Hmm.
emptying. And we can talk about these things, we can think about these things, but
Hmm.
most of us need a model. Most of us need someone that says, I'm doing this, come with
Hmm.
me, follow
Hmm.
me on this pursuit of God. And I think that's a great
Hmm.
word you just said.
Hmm.
So, as you know, Travis, our podcast is called Holy Heretics, and we called it that for a number of reasons, not least of which because Melanie and I, have been labeled as heretical for having the courage to ask some pretty tough questions about faith and really pursue Christianity toward the margins, outside of legalism, outside of fundamentalism. And just hearing your story over the last several minutes, I'm just going to assume that you've potentially been labeled heretical or maybe worse. What would you say is one of the biggest beliefs or postures that you have espoused that may have led some of your more conservative or fundamentalist friends and family from your past to label you something as, bold as a heretic?
Well, I took some real risk when I wrote the book, um, and bringing up some topics that are heterodoxical, right? Um, Reincarnation, or transmigration of the soul, would be one of the important ones
Hmm.
that came up very early on, and then other things. Certainly, the engagement with Zen, um, the idea that you can have, due to meditation disciplines, you can have some of these experiences such as clairvoyance, right? And you can have context with the other side. A lot of that seen as potentially diabolical, right? The other concept would be theosis, would be the name in the Eastern traditions. Union with God. So this idea that we have within us this capacity. I think a lot of people don't want to engage with that. They'd much rather be, told what to believe and not be forced to do the hard work, right? If you're automatically saved, pack up your bags and go home. Well, no, you've just begun a journey, and beyond that, you might continue it beyond one lifetime to the next. So that's definitely out there for a lot of people. Early Christian fathers, some of them certainly considered this, and some of them believed it um, according to some of the writings, right? And even Christ, there's ways of interpreting what he said about John the Baptist and himself as involving this belief that was very much a part of Jewish life at the time and continues to be. So uh, this is something that can be scary for people. They want to just believe this very simple concept of heaven, hell, this life, that life, or just pure materialism. Well, once you say no, that's not true, it's beautiful, but we have to take it to another level. That's going to trigger people because they don't want it. They don't want to deal with that. The Hermetic tradition is the other side of it. So, spiritual ascent paths. I mean, my theological position there is a revitalization of cartographies of the soul, you know, and putting disciplines forward. So that stretches people, that stretches institutions, and it potentially compromises institutional religion, very likely, right?
Mm.
Anna van den Kerkhove is somebody I've been in contact with lately. She's at the Protestant Theological Institute in Paris. She's doing studies of first century's Christian Hermetic tradition overlaps. And we did have some texts come up in the Nag Hammadi text. So who knows? Maybe some shepherd will find a jar that will revolutionize Christianity. I mean, I'm willing to go dig around in Coptic monasteries to see what I can find.
Oh, well, you remind me of, you probably know Bernard McGinn, who's a
Uh,
historian of kind of the ancient Christian mystical practices. And he says it's not enough to have wonderful theories about God. Authentic
mm-hmm,
mystical encounters are what radically change us. And
mm-hmm,
you've referenced some of those. And I do think that they are scary if you've never experienced them, or if you've never been introduced to that. It can sound like something that's very foreign to Christianity, or something that we would want to label as New Age and just run away
mm-hmm,
from. And when you really get to the heart of the matter, this is what Christianity is about. It is a sacred, beautiful, mysterious union with God that
mm-hmm.
we've been invited into, that we were born into, and that for our own sin or our own rebellion, or whatever word you want to use there, we've run away from God. And I would hope that at the end of the day, what Christianity really offers is a pathway back to a beautiful personal union with God. This journey back to our home, which is in
Mm-hmm.
God. And why are we so afraid of that?
Right. Well, you've said it much more eloquently than I can. I'm just kind of a straight shooter. It's like a Zen. I'm gonna lay it down and then that's it. But that's beautifully stated and true. Yes.
Well, we want to ask you the question that we ask everyone because we just think that we all need more hope, and
Hmm.
we want to focus on that, not just things that we see as wrong or bad, or have a feeling like, oh, this is gross, I don't want this anymore. We also want to focus on where the good is and how we can move forward into a beautiful future. So when you look at the future of faith, what gives you hope?
Well, that's a great question. I'm even hopeful about our existing traditions. I think they have the possibility to renew themselves, and by that I mean in evangelical traditions. Um, but I do think this chaos that's happening right now politically is fantastic.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, I had a great 2020, um, uh, only because it creates hope for transformation and renewal. I mean, evangelical Christianity just ran into a massive wall. I mean, they
Yeah.
Mm,
totally, wrecked. So, I mean, if the Republican Party and evangelical Christianity, even survive and stumble away, that's going to be something. But maybe instead, it's transformative, near death experience, so to speak, for for faith tradition, where you really come face to face with true reality. So I'm very hopeful that we can return to, these ancient hermetic truths and practices within the Christian faith. I'm very, very hopeful that we can renew using platforms like the Zen platform. There are many Zen Christian practitioners. Robert Kennedy's Morning Star Zendo, Kevin Hunt's Daystar Zendo. These are both priests, Catholic priests here, even here in America. So, I've started this Zen Christian network site to get Christians who are willing to do discipline meditation linked up and forming actual groups. And I think you can do that whether evangelical or
Mm.
whatever your discipline is or your faith tradition. So I'm very, very hopeful. I went and worked at the World Community for Christian Meditation location in Bonneau, in France, and these are Episcopal priest was there. Gary, she was
Mm.
right there with me. So ecumenical structures within Christianity that was led by a Benedictine monk, but then you had people like me or her. So I think we're going to see real transformation of Christianity, but it's only going to happen if we move to different paradigm frameworks of understanding the world, which have been labeled New Age, but they're not New Age. They're ancient. We just suppressed them. We suppressed
Mm.
them with institutional religion, uh, and including the community of the early church and those value modalities. How we went from we're sharing everything in common to uh, the conceptualizations we have now where we walk around with guns and defend capitalism. It's just mind-boggling how we got there. But
Right.
but we're running to the wall. So great. I think it's
Yep.
fantastic. I'm all for it.
Yep. Yep. It's, I think we want to be about what's next. And as
Hmm.
you said, the religion of the past has mostly died over the
Hmm.
last several years. And yeah, it does give a lot of hope. What's coming next and what can we do to help build that? All right, so
Hmm.
Melanie said we have one last question for you, but we really don't.
Oh.
We actually have um, a series of kind of rapid fire questions that we'd love to
Oh
ask you
boy.
just to kind of end our time together. So
Sure.
basically, we're these are unprepared. You've never seen these. Just answer them
uh,
as maybe as quickly as possible,
well,
and if
silence
that's
might be
okay.
my answer, but all right.
All right. Okay, so first rapid fire question: is there anything that we should have asked you that we failed to?
No.
Okay.
Wow, that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Out of all the
Well,
places
there's
you've
a there's
lived,
an attitude of synchronicity built in there, and divine providence, the trust in divine providence. But yes.
ooh, ooh, I like that. Okay, second question. Out of all the places you've lived, what was your favorite and why?
Wow, that's great. I mean, I've been to a lot of countries. There's no question. It's absolutely, undoubtedly, I've lived in the south of France for quite a number of years, and I love my little walk with my Churchill cigar and my dog up and down Cap d'Antibes
Mm.
and along the sea. So yeah, I mean, the, we are instantiated in real bodies, which we have to get around in and can adore, and we also are on this physical planet. So not always in the ethereal realm. So for me, walking along Cap d'Antibes, that's
Wow. Mm.
it.
All right. So what's something about you that most people don't know that they might be surprised by?
Oh, well, talking about going back and embracing the past, a lot of people didn't know I grew up a hillbilly, and my first job was herding cattle at a stockyard,
Wow.
which is a sister one to the one featured in the movie Winter's Bone, which is set in the same area. So I denied my cowboy self for quite a while. And in French, when I would get tired, right, speaking French all day long, I get tired. Everybody gets tired. Well, I would start to talk in French, right? But with this Missouri accent, because I'm tired, In English, I have no problem. It never comes up. They said, "Tavis, too much de mots. You're eating your words. What's wrong?" I'm like, oh, I know what's wrong. I became a French hillbilly there for a second.
That's awesome.
Are there French
I
hillbillies? I didn't think that was a thing.
A campagnard. Well, they call them that. Yeah, a hillbilly in France. I lived in the French countryside, a few different places, but you go into the tabac and you sit there, and this guy's a hillbilly. He's got, he's clearly, and you start talking about Kant. So it's totally different education system. So their
mm,
hillbillies can discuss Kant. So it's not quite the
That's
same
funny.
thing.
All right. Next question is, if you could go back and tell your childhood self one thing, what would you say?
Read this book I wrote with you in mind.
Mm, I like that.
Hmm.
Okay, final question. This is for real this time. What's your all-time favorite song?
Oh, oh, wow. Now, see, you've stumped me. Hmm. It's funny. There's this one, it's really not a very spiritual one. There's this Waylon Jennings song, I've always been crazy, but it's kept me from going insane.
Your hillbilly roots are speaking for sure.
There you
That one.
Well, this has been really fun and really interesting, Travis. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you
For
very much for
anyone
having me.
and for anyone who's interested, where can they find more info about you or your book or anything else that you're up to?
Sure. On Facebook, I have a Path of Trinity page. My book's on Amazon in US and Europe and other places. And I would just also put in a plug for the World Community for Christian Meditation, Father Keating's Contemplative Prayer Outreach. I have a Zen Christian website I'm developing. Might be able to have some help on that somewhere along the way, but that's a project. So those are places you can find me.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to get those from you so we can put them in the show notes for anyone who's interested as well.
Yep. Hey, Travis, thanks so much for being with us and really sharing your heart and your journey and how you move from fundamentalism into a really more nuanced expression of faith. It's an invitation for all of us to just keep on moving in our spiritual journey.
Thank you.
And that's it for today. We hope you enjoyed all of Travis's wisdom and experience. We do have one favor to ask of you, though. If you have been enjoying and learning from our content, would you just take a moment to hop on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review? Reviews help us get in front of more people, so we would be extremely grateful for a review or even a rating. As always, for show notes, you can head to holyheretics.org, and you can also find all our social media info there if you're interested in following us. This episode was produced by the Sophia Society. Music is by Faith in Foxholes, and sound engineering is by Joshua Mudge.